So today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of background on the Holocaust so we can all be on the same page when we go to our meeting. Okay, so this is a Holocaust Chronology, and the source that I'm using is the student workbook that you all have in front of you from the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. We're going to start with a glossary of terms first. Anti-Semitism. You'll see that I've highlighted the most important part of the definition, but that is hatred against Jews. So for centuries, Jews have been persecuted because of customs that set them apart, made them different from other people. There were scientific theories, so fake scientific theories that suggested that Jews were an inferior race. So what you need to know is in the early 20th century, especially in Germany, anti-Semites portrayed the Jews as a racial enemy responsible for the problems of modernity. The Nazis used this myth in an effort to create homogeneous, that means like grouping, New Germany without Jews. This effort culminated in the attempt to murder all the Jews of Europe. A bystander is a person who observes but is not involved. So during the Holocaust, there were very few instances of people who tried to help the Jewish people out. Most of them either agreed with the Nazis or chose to not participate and therefore were bystanders, and they didn't help, but they also weren't responsible for any hurting themselves. Collaborator, somebody who cooperates with an enemy force. So all of the Nazi occupied countries had collaborators in there. Concentration camps. What you need to know about concentration camps is that they were located throughout Europe and North Africa, and they were not used for the mass murder of Jews. So they were developed by the Nazi Germany, beginning with Dachau in 1933. And they were used as a prison. They were used to imprisonate people who are considered dangerous or undesirable. So they kept putting people in these camps. They wanted the Jewish people to die, but this wasn't the place that they killed them. They didn't take care of them very well, so they either died of starvation, disease, or died from working too hard. The death camps were where they actually killed the Jewish people, so they were also known as killing centers. Camps set up by the Nazis were in occupied Poland mostly, and they were used for the mass murder of Jewish people as well as gypsies, and primarily they used poison gas. There were 6 Nazi death camps, and the most famous one out of those is Auschwitz-Birkenau. The ghetto. This is where I believe that the word originates. So during World War II, the Nazis forced people into neighborhoods, and they were really overcrowded, usually surrounded by walls and fences, meaning they weren't allowed to come and go as they wanted. They had to stay there. So people died there, again, from starvation, disease, forced labor, and sometimes murder. And the sad part is, even the people who survived the ghettos sometimes died when they were either transported to a concentration camp or a death camp. The Holocaust. So the word itself is derived from an ancient Greek, which means, and the word means complete destruction, especially by fire. We use this word most commonly to describe the murder of approximately 6 million Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. The Hebrew word for Holocaust is Shoah, and it means catastrophe, destruction, or disaster. The Nazis. They are members of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and they gained political control with their leadership, Adolf Hitler, in 1933. They were very, very popular at this time. So a lot of people in this party were violently anti-Semitic. They hated Jewish people, and they believed in the supremacy of their race. It wasn't just Jewish people, though, that they hated. They basically hated anybody that was different from them. So they persecuted gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, people who were gay, African Germans, people who disagreed with them politically, and people who had handicaps who were considered burdens on society. The Nuremberg laws, these were created in 1935 to exclude Jewish people legally and make them farther and farther away from German life. So the first law took away their German citizenship from anybody who was non-Aryan, and the second law prohibited them from marrying Germans. So the term non-Aryan was used by the Nazis to refer to all non-Germanic people, especially Jews. So anybody that wasn't pure German was considered non-Aryan. Rescuers. There is some of them. There were some people who helped Jewish people either get out of Nazi-occupied countries or hid them from the Nazis. They saved them from the Nazis in their own homes. And we remember these people for their courage and their humanity and what they did to help others out. Resistance. There were some resistances. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, why didn't they just fight back? And the Nazis took so much away from them that it was very difficult to do it. But they did do it. They did it without weapons. They did it physically. They did it through their religion. So they fought in the forests of Eastern Europe, and they started revolts at 3 of the 6 death camps. And by continuing practicing their religion, they were resisting against the Nazi rule. Last but not least is a synagogue. This is a place where Jewish people study, observe holidays, and gather for community events and pray. Now we're going to move on to the timeline of events. January 30th, 1933, the Nazis were voted into power. September 15th, 1935, the anti-Jewish laws, the Nuremberg laws, which I talked about, were enacted at a Nazi pep rally, and in the easiest terms, they stripped Jews of their German citizenship and forbid them to marry people of German blood. July 6th to the 15th of 1938, there's a conference in France called the Evian Conference, and it was called by the United States. 32 nations discussed the crisis of thousands of Jews trying to escape Europe, yet at this point in time, nobody's really taking action. November 9th and 10th, 1938. This is one of the most famous moments in time. The Nazis used a supposed assassination, as an excuse to organize Kristallnacht, which is also known as the Night of Broken Glass. They murdered 91 Jewish people, destroyed and burned 1,400 synagogues, destroyed shops, and arrested and imprisoned 30,000 Jewish men. On top of that, any of the property that they destroyed, they forced the Jewish people to pay for the repairs themselves. They said, we destroyed this, but we are not responsible for paying for it. September 1st, 1939 is when German troops invade Poland. Any defense that the Polish people had crumbled under a highly organized land and air assault. And later, Britain and France declare war on Germany, and World War II begins. October 31st, 1939, the German military begins to confine Jews to ghettos in Poland. Inside the ghettos, Jews cope with overcrowding, starvation, and disease. And like I said, they were not allowed to come and go as they liked. April 9th to June 14th, 1940, Germany invades the following countries: Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland, and France. And most of Western Europe is now under Nazi power. June 22nd, 1941, German troops invade the Soviet Union, followed by the next day by the mobile killing units Einsatzgruppen that massacre about 1.25 million Jews by September 1943. January 20th, 1942. At the Wannsee Conference near Berlin, Nazi officials discussed details of the Final Solution, which was a plan to kill an estimated 11 million Jews in Europe and Britain. So I just want to pause. Their goal there was to take over the entire European continent and eliminate all the Jewish people that were there. February 15th, 1942, the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp begins mass murder of Jews using Zyklon B gas, which is a pesticide, and by June 1943, the Nazis are murdering and cremating more than 8,000 people a day. July 22nd, 1942. Jews imprisoned in the Warsaw ghettos are snatched from the streets and even from their slave labor factories as German troops begin deporting 5,000 of them to the Treblinka death camp. In less than 2 months, 300,000 Warsaw ghetto Jews are killed. April 19th, 1943, Jewish activists and ghetto residents unite to launch the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in Poland. Lasting almost a month, this was the first civilian armed resistance in any Nazi-occupied city. So it took them a very long time to even get organized and start the resistance. June 6th, 1944, on D-Day, Allied forces land in Normandy, France. The Allied forces would be Britain, France, and the United States. January 18th, 1945. So this is after all the Allied forces have invaded Europe and they are waging World War II. German troops begin evacuating Auschwitz, forcing 66,000 prisoners on a death march. At least 15,000 die. Some 7,000 sick and starving prisoners were left behind and liberated by the Soviets. And April 11th, 1945, American troops liberate Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. British enter Bergen-Belsen in Germany, and 3 days later, in both overcrowded camps, many of the weakest die even after liberation. So because of what the Nazis did to them, they were so weak that even once the Nazis weren't there, some of them still died because they were just so far gone that they couldn't recover. November 20th, 1945. This is the last point on our timeline today. An international military tribunal convenes in Nuremberg, Germany to try 22 Nazi leaders for crimes against humanity and war crimes. So this is when the war is over, we've caught all the Nazi officials that we can, and they are going to be tried in a world military tribunal. All right, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask.